Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this truth bomb riff. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm the producer with the $71 trillion truth, and this is my slash hour, depending on who joins us, 700 and I believe 776th offering, Reagan, over the course of about 4 years to get this information to the American people. And I'm joined by my colleague, my friend, somebody I've grown to admire deeply, a gentleman by the name of Regan Boychuk from Canada, Alberta, Canada. I think he's on a work assignment out in Western Canada at the moment, but because you're on BC time, Pacific time. But I wanted to just set our conversation up this way because there's a lot for us to get to. But I want to address, because I'm really, again, so in the thick of this, Reagan, from the standpoint of, let's hit the mile markers of the big subject items, right? Obviously, war in Iran, everything that means, potential implosion of the American economy, a mega impetus towards fascism with all things ICE, especially as it relates to TSA. Now they're going to be in our airports, which is going to be pretty interesting. And I've seen pictures of unbelievable carnage, not carnage, sorry, nothing like Gaza, nothing like what's in Iran. Just chaos is what I meant to say in America's airports, which is funny because it's going to affect a lot of people who supported Trump and also all of the megalomaniacs that work for corporate America who think they can go over the flyover states and not be affected by this stuff. Oh, they're being affected. Obviously nothing like some of the war zone stuff. And I don't want to even pretend to make that sort of a comparison. But the genesis for what I want to kind of have you hang your hat on, and I'm gonna give you the proper setup here in a minute. But I just watched, for example, in addition to all of my, and by the way, to all of my friends out there, all of our friends, Reagan is becoming kind of a consistent guest on Sunday. So I think these are terrific Sunday conversations, and hopefully they'll linger with you throughout the week because boy, do we get some in-depth analysis and perspective of some significant historical analysis. But I was just watching on the floor of the House in a hearing Alex Acosta from CNN basically saying this mega merger because of Larry Ellison and all things CBS. And of course, he mentions Barry Weiss. And he does it from the perspective that he is a journalist, always prides himself on the pursuit of truth, on all of these sorts of things to hold power to account on behalf of the American people, and that this mega merger is just the next level of the authoritarianism that's going to destroy free speech, journalism, and then ultimately the democracy. Now, for those of you who pay attention to what I've been laying out there in my formulation is we're not a democracy. Everything has been alive for now decades, maybe for centuries, but particularly decades in context of what it is that I have actually the receipts of. And then ultimately how that plays into this notion of journalism being the fourth estate. That was the reason why I had to become the producer that became someone who was able to aggregate the $71 trillion truth. Why? Because mainstream media has been failing for decades. They were, before we've got these oligarch overlords, it was the corporate overlords. And during that time period, over 25 years, private equity, hedge funds, asset management, every shape or form of the financial industry has destroyed the fourth estate. They've given us algorithms, they've given us manipulation, they give us stories that they rehatch this, that, and the other that many of us are paying subscription fees to basically check out and live in a fantasy land while not understanding all of the elements that have now created this insanity of this death spiral that we're in the midst of. That's not just the United States, but potentially the world as a result of course, who we are in this whole matrix. But now I'm gonna tee you up to let you roll with it and see where we go. But I will say this to the audience: Reagan has, in addition to being qualified as a journalist, I've already established what he's done over the course of a long period of his career and what he's done and what he's in the midst of. And just to remind people, I think again, I always kind of allude to this, and I got it wrong at one point, but you've got a master's in political science. Is that right? So it's a master's in political science, and you've been involved with journalism and digging deep into all sorts of elements that intersected with what my work has done. And together we lift each other up. But you have this incredible knowledge of imperialism. And interestingly enough, when I made my first film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, which postulates and puts together the paradigm of power, which I presented 13 years ago, and I'll put the link down below that I hope people will watch because it's free, but it'll look like it just was made yesterday in terms of the actual issues that have created the now. Why? Because what I discovered the paradigm of power is, it's a financial, well, I should say, it's a military industrial, financial, fossil fuel intelligence paradigm. That's the new boss, same as the old boss, right? That's imperialism. That may as well have been the East India Trading Company, Parliament, King George III, and of course the redcoats in the Navy. That's exactly what we are, just with technology overdrive, but driven by a madman who has no coherent strategy in Iran, who contradicts himself every day, who's this bone spur idiot who got out of 5 deferments to Vietnam, who called people in our military suckers and losers, and now are using them as his own private junta on behalf of what? Putin, the fossil fuel global paradox, and MBS, among others. I mean, it's absolutely insane. But I will say this is my last piece to you. If somehow, and I have no idea what's going to happen, and I think it's going to be a prolonged war, and I think it's going to get ugly, and I think it's going to lead to much more devastation, particularly economically. But and because he's such an idiot, and he got rid of all the brass that actually knew what they were doing, so they would fall in line with this guy, which is fascism 101, and why I always compare him not to Hitler but to Mussolini. Incompetence with a righteous version of himself because he's surrounded by sycophants. Meanwhile, the guy says things like communism's been around for 2,000 years, and we've been, 300 million Americans were killed by drug cartels. The guy is so insanely idiotic. The fact that the 25th Amendment hasn't been played out and that the Republicans continue to do this. America, you need to wake the fuck up. The world, you need to understand that there's a population of Americans that it's a small percentage of us, but if we can come together under the information that we have to set forth what we've put together in the Clean New Deal, we will turn the tables on this, and hopefully the rest of the world will find us salvageable enough in some capacity because of aligned interests and history and everything else that we can hopefully mend this broken, shattered relationship. And my apologies to the rest of the world on behalf of this collapsed America. But it's imperialism, Regan, is it not?
It's absolutely true. And it's also absolutely true that it's not possible to make sense of this morning's news. For every Canadian, every American, no matter how earnest, how good, how keen they are, you can't wake up, open the newspaper, turn on the television, go on the internet, and make sense of what's happening today. My secret and your secret is that we're standing on the shoulders of people who figured out the last time this happened. For you, after 1971, dramatic changes in the international financial banking world that took the form of the savings and loan debacle, that William K. Black was in a position, despite the odds, to figure out and prosecute, that when 2008 happened to you, the next big, giant financial collapse, you felt that you made sense of it. You found the person who figured it out last time it happened, who could have prevented this time, who predicted it. And I learned from you how these things work. I live here. I live and grew up in Alberta, where the oil is. Oil is the most important industry. I'm a young political science student trying to figure out how the world works, maybe make it even a little bit better, I start looking at the oil industry in Alberta, look at how much money comes out of the ground and how much makes it into the provincial budget, and trying to make sense of how this works and where all the money's going because we don't get it. And then I find the con in Patrick Lovell's team of whistleblowers that explained to me how financial crime worked. And a light bulb goes off. That's what financial crime? That's what this is. And it makes perfect sense. And I keep pulling on that thread that I'm onto something really big that nobody wants to talk about. And none of them can prove me wrong. And so for years, I've been pulling on this thread. And the secret to my success was simply Googling one day. A declassified document came up. It wasn't terribly related to what I was searching, but at the top of the results, just an official Canadian link to a document that was declassified in 1986 about a treaty that Canada and the US signed during World War II in Ogdensburg, New York, and that since 1954, there's the Canadian Army censors won't allow anyone to say Ogdensburg Treaty or the dates associated with that treaty without the express written consent of the sovereign, the governor general. And so that's the key that I can go. It's a real treaty. It's in our official series. You can go look it up. And it has the date on it, so you know the date. And then I also know that it's censored. And when I'm looking at the history of all these things, of the oil industry and all the things that I study, and I go to look for the dates, they're missing. There's the weirdest thing about Canadian history books. When I'm looking at the oil industry, there's no dates. I have to look at 4 different sources and to go 200 pages different in the book and on a footnote to find the actual date that something really important happened. Oh, that's imperialism. That's this nugget of certified, we signed a permanent treaty. It says permanent in the title, permanently subjugating ourselves to America. And that was the entrance fee for joining Britain in World War II, just like they set it up before World War I. And so that treaty and those dates, I keep pulling on the thread. And I find the hole in the historical record, just the black redacted box. But I can fill in the blanks in different ways, connecting the dots of imperialism, because that's how imperialism works. They don't run their mouths anymore. They don't talk about how they're racially superior and how they have God-given right. They don't, since World War I, you can't get away with that stuff anymore. You don't talk about imperialism, but it's still happening. And the people who suffer it or are subject to it understand what's going on. They understand what the dates mean and things mean. And it turns out that this 2008 financial collapse, this financial calamity, the British control of Canada as a colony and its gift to America, its use since, is all part of British brand of imperialism started 300 years ago. And all of it from India and Canada in the early 1700s all started the foundation of all the British Empire, besides Ireland that they were slaughtering and still trying to subjugate. The British Empire we know that conquered 40% of the world is based on 2 things: yellow journalists and financial fraud. And it started with Queen Anne, Jonathan Swift, Daniel Defoe, and another cast of characters. But that's when the first newspapers were created. The first stock markets were taking shape. The East India Company had been cooking. But in 1711, on the anniversary of the Magna Carta, or the anniversary of the Hudson Bay Company that was started to colonize Canada, on that anniversary in 1711, they created the South Sea Company, kind of a new and improved East India Company created by Parliament, open on the stock market. Everybody can invest, get in on the game. Lord knows there's going to be some free money. We've got exclusive trades, slave trading rights in North America, et cetera, et cetera. And so from the beginning, Canada and oil, journalism, and stock market fraud are all a royal conspiracy from the early 1700s on. And the secret to all of it in 1700s and today is the king and his friends who own everything don't suffer when there's a financial collapse. Did Donald Trump suffer any of the recessions he's lived through? No. He goes bankrupt, born again, fresh, new, while mere mortals live under a bridge. And so that's the difference. And that's why we have financial crashes, because the state steps in and eliminates all those contracts, all those financial contracts. Finance isn't a way to print free money. Every financial thing created is an asset, but it's also a liability. And it's a contract over time that has to be honored. And if it's honored, it doesn't create free money. That money is earned over time and repaid, and only a small amount of the interest is new money created. But you also created all those new things in the course of it, so it can all work out well. The problem is, if you make too many of these promises that they can't actually be honored in the future, there might be a recession. Anything bad happens, you won't be able to honor them. And for mortals, that means you lose your job, which means you lose your home, which means good luck feeding yourself or your family. For the elite, for the king and their friends, for the business class, they operate in corporations. When things go bad and things collapse, a make-believe institution disappears along with all of its liabilities. And so every time there's a recession, tens of thousands of corporations disappear. They're gone, along with all their debts and all their unpaid bills and all their obligations to no cost to the actual humans. It's just a make-believe thing. You can have 10 of them. They can all disappear. You've just shed $1 billion of debt. You're good to go. You still own everything real. And now the rest of the world's on sale for pennies on the dollar in a recession. You can gobble it all up and increase your concentration of power every time, every recession. And it's strange how these elites, they don't fear recession. They seem to run towards it like lemmings in the media every single time, including the first time 300 years ago, the South Sea bubble. The British state sold all of its state debt, all of the debt, all the wars, fighting France, all the debts they had. For some reason, the South Sea Company bought it all. And then they hadn't even finished deciding the terms, how much they were going to pay. And then, oh, giant recession, it all blew up. Oh, that's really bad for all the folks who invested. And that's, well, I guess those liabilities disappeared too. So now the British state, the whole country, has zero debt. It has incredible liquidity to do whatever it wants, to borrow more money against its assets. And that's how it took over Rupert's Land in Canada and bought its way into India. That's what financed the first imperial expansion of Britain. And that sort of thing has continued. Canada has been the secret sauce for 300 years. The first stock markets, the first financial bubbles, oil wasn't even a thing. But they knew there was 175 billion barrels of oil in Alberta in 1715. And this has been cooking and building slow term it's like the world's biggest gold mine. It's like having one half of all the world's gold. Or like if you're an imperialist, like Cecil Rhodes, who founded De Beers Mining, it's like if you had the diamond mines in South Africa, the greatest on earth, the vast majority of the world, a complete monopoly on diamonds in South Africa. That's Cecil Rhodes, the British imperialist, and oil in Canada. With those two little jewels, what could you not do, isn't it? And that's the British Empire. 1715, they found the oil. By 1900, they have South Africa. Cecil Rhodes is the Prime Minister of Cape. They have South Africa. It's not apartheid yet, but they have all the mines. They have all those. And in 1897, the fake British colonial government in Canada sold the oil industry to Standard Oil secretly in 1897. Nobody knew it happened, but they paid every shareholder a few $1 million each. So nobody complained, nobody reported it. But that's the secret sort of background that's been unfolding and cooking before World War I, during World War II, the Ogdensburg Treaty, the age of oil since, and we're here today. And the mask, you and I have been peering behind the mask, describing what's behind the curtain. And now the curtains have fallen and the masks are dropped, and the power and fraud and yellow journalism is naked everywhere. You can't even find an exception. When we think of journalism, what is essential to the even idea of the reason those jerks talk about democracy or talk about journalism is because you can't have anything that even could pretend to be democracy without journalism. I mean, there's no such thing as democracy without journalism. And so that's why they all talk a game and aspire and talk about how they do. But me and you know, been in the trenches. We know those guys. We talk to them. And if they say anything, it'll be too late. They do say things, and we can go back and look, but they're always too late. They always were played dumb enough to get us the same place every time. And it does blow up, and somebody's got to take the blame, and they have to come up with excuses. And so they may say some honest things, but I guarantee you they didn't say it when it mattered. And find an exception. And that's how you know that what we think of journalism, what we think of democracy, they're still possible, but they're the exception. Bill Black showed even today, even in possible political environment of Ronald Reagan in the 80s, that it is possible to do these things, but you're not going to learn it in school. They're not going to tell you about it in the newspaper. It's not going to be on the evening news if there even is such a thing anymore. But unless you have the understanding of the con, you can't make sense of today. And I've just continued that backwards, making sense of how we got here, but we know the end point. Naked, like they don't even, there's no even excuse for Iran. They didn't try to make anything, and yet the media still portrays as some sort of aggression when they attack a military base that's been the supreme international crime of aggression, of invading without reason in the middle of negotiations when they'd agreed to everything, no enrichment ever, etc. How do you make sense of that? It's not that they're stupid. Donald Trump is there because he's a circus clown. He will do and say any absolutely shameless. Like that is so valuable. The strategy is always shifting. He can say anything or nothing, and it's literally impossible to make sense of him unless you have a clear theory and understanding of what is going on. Patrick can see everything true that Donald says, and that's the beauty of being in this position of power and impunity. You can say it. You can, and people who know hear you say the true things. All the things he's doing, at one point he said, he's talked about terrorists, he's also said the opposite. And so there's no way to make sense unless you have a clear understanding of the structural what's going on, then you can't make sense of the news. And they revel in it. They swim in it. Everybody knows their rule. They are not worried. The truth does not matter. The law does not. It's just for little people. Except if the little people understood what the hell was going on, that we were being robbed, that they are criminals, that they're not stupid. It's not an accident. Iran has been defending itself against a whole bunch of American colonies that host American bases for an American attack on them. One thing they haven't done is hit a hospital or a school. Just the good guys do that. And that's the crazy thing about the world we're in. The good guys are doing crimes we've never even heard of. The things happening in the Navy, attacking hospitals, journalists, schools, that's medieval. That's, and those are the good guys. I mean, we need a bad guy. We're looking for a bad guy. And, but the bad guys don't do anything of the sort. It's the good guys. And it's the mindset, it's the perception, it's the framework that we understand things. We're brought up in a system that makes all these things invisible. They don't make, all we see is stupid. They're stupid. They're stupid. And all we can do is have the schadenfreude of feeling better than those dummies, than those monsters. We have the Epstein files. We know they're monsters. We turn on the news. They're stupid. They're stupid. So that's all we get. That we're smarter than them. We're better. And that's the consolation we get as observers to this game where we don't participate in. There is not, I'm a political scientist. I grew up in Canada, in Alberta. There's nothing resembling anything anyone can claim democracy. I went to journalism school. I got a diploma in print journalism before I went to do my undergraduate in international relations. I studied journalism. I wanted to be, but I discover what's really going on, that we're a colony. It's censored. Literally, it's illegal. You cannot put that in the newspaper. So I can know all the journalists. I can work with them for a decade. We can work on stories forever until I discover the Ogdensburg Treaty. Then they will never return a text or an email ever again. Never cover another story. I don't exist. When you get down to brass tacks, you can talk about high school clubs or this or that. This is the meat of it. And journalism doesn't exist. There's nothing, I'm a political scientist. There's nothing resembling journalism or public debate about any issue. It's just designed, given from on high, like we're a colony. And because the media is part of it, they justify it, tell stories, and it is the end of days. This game has repeated for 300 years, grown. Their power has concentrated over and over. Their impunity has grown that they are throwing their masks on the ground, marching. Donald Trump increased the military budget to $1 trillion. Global arms spending is an all-time insane high, growing 19% a year in previous years. And that was before Iran, with another 200 billion and next year's 1.5 trillion Department of War budget. It's kind of like, despite, you have to just forget everything you ever learned. Like you landed from Mars and you're watching the US and its puppets attack this country from the outside, that maybe this is a world war. And if you go back and look at the last couple of years of how have the United States been behaving, where's the United Nations? Where's international law? Where's all those things we thought existed and now have disappeared without commentary? They're not lamented. There's not any big, they pretend like it doesn't happen, like it doesn't matter. It's replaced by the Board of Peace with that. You can't make sense of it unless you know the new untouchables. The Bill Black cracked the code and showed the financial fraud that is the very heart of Anglo-American imperialism. They don't necessarily, well, and they do these days. They might kidnap your president. They might, the Marines might invade, replace a government. But that's to get the financial. That's to set up the financial and the banking so that every bit of surplus coming out of that country ends up in New York. And nobody studies international economics. The last person to teach international balance of trade was Michael Hudson in the 1960s, while he was doing balance of payment analysis for the Rockefellers at America's biggest bank. And he was the only person in North America who taught the subject. And nobody in 50 years has taught it since, because that's imperialism. That's how money gets transferred, tens of trillions from India ends up in Britain. Not because there was a massacre every year and they took the gold. Imperialism is financial. The 2008 collapse, turns out it was imperialism. It was built on the back of stolen Alberta oil. That's where the trillions of dollars of collateral. There's a strange thing nobody has explained. After they occupied Iraq, the oil in Alberta became legal collateral to lend. Who did they lend it to? Turns out you can't answer that question in Canada because the banking system doesn't keep any records. So it happens to be unique in the world. Oh, that's a little bit strange, but I guess who knows? 1 year after, $9 trillion of collateral that was given to the Rockefellers for free in the 50s. 1 year after, Iraq made that legal collateral for the Rockefellers' banks. The FBI is warning about an epidemic of predatory mortgage fraud. For the first time in history, unexplained before or since, poor people, colored people in America could get a mortgage. Actually, they could get a mortgage whether they wanted to or not. They're going door to door giving away mortgages. Then they're stealing files from churches to fraud as many fake mortgages. What is going on? Something in the millennia of banking has changed. There's some sort of what's going on. Bankers don't give money to people who don't have money. That's why poor people are poor. Rich people live for free because they got money you got $1 million in the bank. You can borrow $1 million. You can have your corporation borrow $1 million. And if anything goes wrong, your corporation disappears. You still got your $1 million over here. It's perfect. But it doesn't work for real people. And so that's what's about to happen again. We're about to go into a crash, and Donald Trump and his friends are about to have all their debts forgiven. And on the national scale, that's what the American empire is going. And they're going to break as many contracts as they can to keep what they have and to not pay their debts. And that's what World War and this next crash is going to facilitate. They love it. Actually, they need it because along with AI and trillions of dollars of bullshit, fad, hype investment, that's all free money because it's all about to pop. So you write those checks and make those promises. The banks hit their button on the keyboard. The money appears in Miss Ellis's pocket. He buys CNN and other things. And when the recession comes, the contracts to repay those debts disappear. And the money that was printed for free and made in the pockets stays there. That's where the rich came from. That's why you have 1,000 more billionaires in America than he did in 2003. 225 years of America, how many billionaires? Until you finally got complete financial control of all that oil in Alberta. And so from 2003 to today, you have thousands of billionaires. You don't know their names. You can't explain where the money come from, but it's banks hitting money on their keyboard. And they don't do it for free. And the secret behind it was tomorrow's oil production from Alberta, 4 million barrels a day at $100 a barrel. That's the money that repays American oil companies' debts. Oil companies in Canada borrow $160 billion a year from Canadian banks to dig up oil that Canadians own. It's the weirdest thing. We give it away. They steal it from us. They don't pay it. And then we lend them an additional $160 billion a year that's repaid tomorrow with oil that comes out of the ground tomorrow. And that daily output of free money from nature, that's what repays $160 billion of American borrowing. They also get the oil they take without paying any royalties, so for free. And that's why they want to build more pipelines so they can rob us faster. And since 1971, that oil has been the new twin pillar of the financial system. Up until from World War II to 1971, there was the International Gold Standard. It puts a tight limit on the amount of money that can be created out of thin air. By tying it to gold, which is a physical thing, there's a more or less limited supply of, that power is a zero-sum game. that if you're going to build an army, you're going to have to spend $1 trillion of gold and give it to someone else. And now you might have $1 trillion army, but they have all your gold. And so it puts a tight limit on international competition, how much you can get away. Only physical things can back lending. But in 1971, when the US lost control of Alberta, lost control of all that oil they had for free that they hadn't yet financialized, they shifted. And so the end of the gold standard in 1971 meant that now there's two bases of the financial system: gold and all the physical things that have always been the basis of all banking ever. Banking can be responsible in that line. But after 1971, oil reserves were added to the definition of legal collateral. Since the Great Depression, since the stock market reforms of the 1930s, bankers and oil men were kept separate. Those are two criminals you do not want working together. They both have letters from the king of free resources and the ability to print money. You don't want these guys meeting in secret. And so from the 30s until 1971, oil men couldn't borrow money. They didn't need to. I mean, it's free money coming. They got more money than they know what to do. You don't need to borrow any money. It's stupid. But in 1971, they started borrowing money. And it immediately led to commercial real estate fraud and bank failures that Bill Black saw, figured out, and prosecuted. Because it's racketeering. Because it's bullshit. And that's exactly what's happening in Alberta. And that when they lost Alberta, that's a giant blow. That's $9 trillion of collateral that disappeared from a financial system. That's when it was time to kick Americans' ass. That's when the class war was brought home. That's when everything started to go shitty. The schools and all the funding of the 50s and 60s, that was over, and it's been going downhill since, and that's why. You lost control of Alberta. And so they started financializing oil reserves around Chicago, where you got the mob and some old oil. In California, where you got crime as tons and lots of oil. In Texas. And that's where it began. That's what it was happening. And I find the Kong, and I find Bill Black, and I read everything Bill Black's ever written, and I've got the key to figure out what's going on. And I just happen to have studied journalism. Then I went to university and did international relations and studied the Middle East and the Israel-Palestine conflict during the Second Intifada. And I come back from graduate school and to Alberta and decide, well, nobody's really studying the oil industry. It's obviously I should do that. So I started investigating the oil industry. So I have journalism, U.S. imperialism, foreign policy, the Middle East, the oil industry. And it took me 25 years to realize how I'm in the middle of it all. But it's a secret. You can't talk about crimes. But just because mobsters don't talk about crimes doesn't mean you can't prosecute them. You don't need them to spill the beans. You don't need them to admit anything if you understand what they're doing. Patrick and I understand what they're doing today. AI, the stock market bubble, Ellis, CBS, Iran. It's insane if you believe the American dream, the American system, if you believe what they say in the newspaper, on the news. It's perfect sense in the proper context, and that's the danger. You've been hammering it home 800 times because it's like a switch that could flip. Once you can't fool them. You can't. I mean, and that's the thing. Things are bad. People are sad. People don't want to learn anymore. But when they find what's really happening, not only is it even worse than you ever imagined, it's more solvable than you ever imagined. It's the way to pay for it. No problem. It turns out it's a crime of enormous proportions, pretty easy to stop. You treat due process everything. We don't need to raise an army. We just put criminals in jail, and the public controls the free gift of nature. We still got a fighting chance. But we are so close to midnight that all these assholes have dropped their masks. They voluntarily gave out 3 million Epstein files. They are consciously, purposely discrediting everything. They want to wreck it all. They need the shit to crash sometime soon so they can enforce the costs on us, put another 10 million Americans under bridges. Unless, smarten up, don't forgive the elite's debts. Make them pay just this one time. Instead, let's forgive the 99.99% debts, all of them. What really happens, because banks just hit that button on their keyboard, it doesn't cost them anything to create those trillions of dollars in assets. So the flip side is when we take it away from them, it won't cost them anything. This number on a balance sheet will change. And nothing else in the whole world will change except assholes will have less money. And there's a lot of bullshit contracts that were designed to collapse and are about to explode, and the economic consequences will be felt by citizens unless they don't understand what's going on. We do need a reset. We do need debt forgiveness. For the last 300 years, that's gone to the corporate class. They've got their debts forgiven. Every crash. They came out fresh, buying on sale, increasing, and they've gotten to such a point that it's this naked. And so things are worse than people knew, but despite the clock running out, there's an extremely good chance that not only can it be fixed, the people are still here, the solutions that that's why we can't get them. That's why we're not allowed to have them. But unless we get rid of the criminals standing in the way, we never will. It's not because they don't work. It's because there's criminals in the way. And Bill Black and his friends put 7,000 of them in prison. And swear to God, that's all we need today is to put those folks in prison, and it's a new world. That's what we desperately need. And there's zero choice. It's either that or this is World War III. This is a game for the rest. We are on the wrong side of humanity. We are on the dark side. We are good guys, bad guys. We are on the side that has no future. It's going to get ugly. It's even worse up here in Canada, but there's plenty of it coming home to America. And it's the Clean New Deal. Senses every dimension of this: judicial, academic, journalism. It felt all those, ran up to them, felt them in the dark decades ago, figured out what they were, and it all fits together. And that's how you make sense of they're not stupid. And there's almost no analysis besides that. And we got to stop accepting that. People don't know the answers, but they got to start looking a hell of a lot harder. Than they're stupid, they're jerks, they're monsters. Because we don't have a choice between ones that aren't. And so we got to break out of this. It's an impossible task for anyone to achieve today. But you and I stand on the shoulders of folks here in Canada and Alberta that defeated this thing. Peter Lougheed in Alberta in the 70s and 80s defeated this thing. Bill Black and his friends in the 80s defeated this thing. And they still can. And that's why things are scary, but more hopeful and invigorating than could ever imagine. It's a real gift, and it's what drives both of us. That if we can get people to look through a different lens, then it's like X-ray glasses is what you're offering. If we understand this financial fraud, you can read the newspapers with X-ray glasses, and you'll know when he says something true. And you'll know when he's full of shit and he's contradicting himself. But that's an incredible gift because all of this is premised on ignorance and confusion. And so that's what's sown, and that's what and how you're supposed to make sense is with the dirt in your eyes and the endless lies. But Patrick proves it's still possible. I spent decades, I didn't find a single journalist anywhere in Canada, and I didn't find any. And I knew lots of American journalists, and I worked with lots of them, and they didn't actually turn out to be a whole lot different. Patrick's the only real journalist I ever found in 30 years of studying and reading tens of thousands of news. There's great journalists. There's wonderful things. You just have to understand that that's the exception, and that's an amazing achievement. And there's incredible things to be learned from every single one of those. And that's what you're doing today, working with thousands of whistleblowers. It's we couldn't ask for a better setup. Like everything can be changed. We just have to look at the world differently, see it clearly. And Patrick delivered that. Decades of studying these things here. He made sense of things on the back of those whistleblowers I never found here. That's America's gift. You have Bill Black and thousands of whistleblowers. They don't exist here. I've been looking forever. Some of them are somewhere. There's been blips and nothing like America. Just a steady, and there's a giant machine that beats them every time, but it's right there. And so people like Bill Black and Peter Lougheed here in Alberta, unfortunately, prove it can be done. So there isn't any excuse to sit on your couch or give up or just. And that's what we can offer is what they taught us, and their example is exactly what's needed. It's not a joke. It's not a thing. We're not selling something. It's not. This is genuine. It's a strange foreign thing. People know it in their real life, but there's no genuineness in politics or the media. And now we know why, because they're part of this crime. And they look good and they talk good and they love each other, praise each other, and it's easy to fall into that. You just have to be honest and not forget. When they lie, when they demonstrate their bad faith, that's it, full stop, they're done. They're dead to you. There's no good excuse for any person to ever behave in bad faith. And in personal life, you'll go throughout your whole life. You'll rarely come into it, except in the corporate world, except in politics, except in the media. It's absolute rule. And when people demonstrate their bad faith, you don't ever need to listen to them again, believe anything they ever say, true or not, because they can't be trusted. That's like AI. That's like this military technology that's taken over. It can't be trusted. Lies constantly. Ask it about the Ogdensburg Treaty. It'll just lie to you. And then you just mention a few, and it'll apologize and accept it, but it can't be trusted. Same thing with our media and our politicians. But luckily, there are people that can't be trusted. You can trust Bill Black. You can trust the new untouchables. They've proven it the hard way and have maintained it. Those blips, they're rare, they're fleeting. Bill Black's still here 30 years later. We're still getting together every week, analyzing, working, giving everything they have to make sense to fix these things. Those are the people we need. You've brought them all together. Those are the people we can learn from. Those are the most important people. They have the most to teach us. And that's what you're trying to do hundreds and hundreds of times. That's what explains it. It's not corporate media level ego. It's not some sort of religious vision, some story you've been spinning. It's incredibly hard. Thousands of details put together very carefully. It's not easy to criticize the rich and powerful. You don't get to fuck up. They run their mouth, say whatever. They don't ever have to worry. As critics of that, if we ever make any mistake, that'll be the end of us. And it's kind of a gift. It keeps our standards really high. If we want to go after the real ones, we have to beat them at their own game. We have to know it better than they do. It's not something you do in the evening after a couple of beers chatting with your friends. It takes an enormous amount of work, and there's nobody in the world that pays for it. The rich people that fund everything in the world, all the charities and foundations, they do not fund work that reveals this. So that means there would be an ocean of other things to distract us with and confuse us with, but not this. And so it's only isolated, crazy, fanatical people that are committed beyond all rationality to these principles and ideas, that learn enough that can offer the understanding that we need, but they won't give it to you. But it is out there, and on 700 times. And it's not citizens' fault that they can't make sense of this, and can't blame them for being skeptical. Everyone's a shyster. They're surrounded by it. And the only way to convince them otherwise is to keep beating the drum. You didn't fly by night. You didn't disappear after a month. They didn't debunk you. They didn't discover you're full of shit. You're still here saying the same things over and because they're true. And you keep building on them. And every week you can add more to the pile and more to the pile of the morning's news. It's incredible confirmation that you have the right theory. You have the right structure that is explaining things as they unfold. And that's how we can fix them. Only by understanding can you reform it. And that's what we have. It's tantalizing and existential. There's zero choice now for anyone on the planet. It's up to Americans to diffuse the American bomb from the inside. There is no outside force that can stop it. They will try to defend themselves and limit the damage. I'm on the wrong side of that line. I'm part of the inside, so I'm extra relying on Americans to fulfill the American dream, to those ideals, the reason they sound so good, that people believe in them. They can build this big thing. It's because they're true, because they work, and that's the American system is the only one that dismantled this sort of imperial fraud. That's what the rebellion was against. That's whatever the truth of America was. It held out the potential. Unique in the world. There's nothing in Canada that's ever done anything to prevent imperial plunder. We were created to be plundered. Everything about us facilitates that plunder, from university education to the royalty regime to the taxes to the trade rules. All of it is to facilitate foreign plunder, except in sovereign countries like America. That's the meaning of being sovereign. Nobody's robbing me. There might be assholes robbing you on the inside, but at least you're not being robbed blind on the outside. And that's what China is, and that's what they've built. Nobody's been robbing China for a while. So everything they built, they get to keep. And they have these crazy ideas that they care about other people in this socialism stuff, and they've made the investments in their country that now put the rest of us to shame, and we can't understand, and because they're simply not getting robbed. That's the kind of future available to every sovereign country. If you weren't being robbed, I would live in the land of milk and honey. Alberta's been mired in deficits for 20 years. Things are falling apart. It's an absolute embarrassment. And we have more oil, more production, and more wealth in those Middle Eastern Emirates. We don't have many more people, but we don't have any money. And there's nothing in the bank. And nobody seems to think that's weird. But if we were sovereign and weren't being robbed, we'd have more money than we knew what to do with. The same goes true everywhere else. And America's no longer benefiting from imperialism on the rest of the world. Whatever built that has been radically reduced. You're not living high on the hog. You're not enjoying the benefits of the 50s and 60s when the British Empire was transferred and all that free money poured in. And so you could work at the gas station and your wife could stay at home and you could raise a family of 8 and vacation because all that money was coming in. It's not coming in anymore. And you're not building real things. That means it's going to crash. When they're just stealing the money, it's not going to build the productive things to repay the loans. So doom is coming for America too. But the ideas are there, the people are there to make sense of the morning's news and to navigate a different path. There's no more choice. And you understood all that the whole time. The Clean New Deal has all the dimensions that would fix this. It is really that simple. And there's no other choice. Nobody's offering this good of an explanation. So you and I happily debate anyone on earth, anywhere, anytime about anything. You think we're wrong, you want to clarify something, go ahead and try. There's a reason they don't, they can't, but it is possible for regular folks who aren't getting paid by somebody to do something to make sense of things, to make a difference, only if they come together, like Patrick has done with Bill Black and everybody else in the New Untouchables. That all those folks who get that's incredibly powerful, and that knowledge and understanding can translate into wider citizens. That it only takes a handful to. That's contagious, and that's hopeful, and that's why we're doing this on a Sunday morning.
Wow, that was one hell of a powerful dissertation, Reagan. And I'm so touched and humbled and honored of your framing. But it also is true for both of us. Like you, I've been in the eye of this hurricane for much of my life, but the last 25 years in a very meaningful way, in which the last 15 years has been in the trenches of having the great fortune against all of the headwinds and the currents to be able to aggregate this information that you so correctly identified is really the ultimate opportunity given everything that we're talking about. And it's ironic that, maybe I got the life lessons from sort of, commercial media, fictional depictions of Americans, sort of Hollywood grandiosity in terms of the grand scale battle between good and evil, the Star Wars of the world, all of those types of, from superheroes and Gotham and all of these constructs, that you can battle and defeat the wicked. You just have to understand their game, and you have to have patience and blah, blah, blah. Okay. That being said, it's a whole lot different when you have to elevate to the level that you've discussed, where we could literally meet with the presumed world experts in every aspect of what you described, and not only hold our own, but defeat them, because we have the evidence in every direction that the system of obfuscation of this Orwellian membrane of psychology, fostered by really, really capable and genius people of manipulation, particularly as it relates to psychology, i.e., asymmetric information, which I learned from the best because of my journey. I got a chance earlier in my, and unfortunately passed away, the unbelievable Dr. Phil Zimbardo, who was the professor emeritus of psychology at Stanford. And oh, yeah, by the way, was probably responsible in some manner, shape, or form of a lot of CIA, serial type of information that was used in a lot of nefarious ways, not because he initiated it, but because he understood the psychological process. And very much like you had identified, who was also my favorite economist, Michael Hudson, who from the very beginning, and yes, he is a Marxist Leninist, and he comes from the tradition of who was killed in Mexico City, who was the dissident. Trotsky, right? And so,
family friend.
What's that?
Trotsky was a family friend. His dad was a major.
Yeah. In Chicago and all of that, and they've in like New York, they've that intellectual tradition has always been there. And for those of you who watch these and understand who I am, I'm an entrepreneur. So I'm a capitalist, but I'm not a exploitative capitalist by way of what we've seen in monopolistic gangsterism, end stage capitalism, because you got to pay producers and journalists and everybody else to live, to be able to do the hard work, to be able to get things done at a level that we're talking about, because otherwise you're up against the top, $4,500 an hour professionals in law that came out of the top universities in the United States, that are these tall building law firms that know every trick in the book to be able to serve their clients. And in this case, the government, if it's been corrupted, they're going to serve corruption. That's what I had to unpack really at the beginning of this journey, because I believed in the law. I believed in the integrity of the system. I thought, wait a second, we're the United States. We're the guys who, came out on top in World War II. we went through all of these battles from the American Revolution, the Civil War and civil rights, and World War II against fascism. The good always comes out on top, even though it's a mixed bag a lot of times, and I recognize that. But at the same time, to Reagan's point, specifically as it relates to my mentor, William K. Black, is that he and his team were extraordinary at the amount of discipline and courage and capacity to do work at levels that are mind-boggling, with even more difficult fraud that was so much more camouflaged without the, shall we say, the immediacy of technology. They did things that were like NASA, okay? The legal equivalency of NASA. And the savings and loan crisis would have been the great financial crisis had it not been for Bill Black and his team that did things that, we talk about in our truth bombs all the time. The thing that I want to try to extrapolate here and lead into a close for the Sunday conversation is some of these incredible pieces that Reagan so, I think, brilliantly weaved, particularly as it relates to imperialism. Because I was always kind of aware of this in my studies of history, particularly American history, but less so than I am now, thanks to the guidance of some of this incredible material that Reagan has been able to educate me about. But for example, when we're talking about, let's just call it the cronyism and the revolving door, and let's say the shared interests of the economic class, i.e. the financial class, that is imperialism, but particularly as it relates to deregulation in the United States post, let's just say, the Clinton era, because that's when really the deep dive on being able to create this monstrosity that we've been in the midst of for the last 40 years, even though Clinton's the 90s, but let's call it 35 years in that case, late 90s with the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. But the triad, if you will, or what does Bill Black call it? It's not the triad. It's like that, but it's like what the MAGAs might think of intuitively, or the smart ones that are the Steve Bannons of the world. They would call it the deep state, but they're very much the deep state. Which, of course, in my introduction, I didn't bring up the Epstein class, but I have to address that now, in so much that in imperialism, when you have yellow journalism on top of this military adventurism that's tied to imperialism, the historical narrative is a lot of times, particularly as it related to the United Kingdom, there's a technique called smash and grab. You go into foreign countries, you set up shop, eventually you get them to trade in your currency because you bankrupted their commodities. And then you find a strong man to do your bidding while you're able to extract and exploit. Okay, and that's ultimately the smash and grab techniques. Now, I vaguely knew of that before the 2008 great financial crisis, but that's what ultimately started to synchronize in my mind as I started putting all of these pieces together in my journey as a documentary film producer, that led me to become a muckraking journalist, that now led me to become an activist to try to help reboot this country based on what I understood our country to be growing up. And then I learned we're the exact perverse inverse of everything that I was sold to believe. And I'm really pissed off about that. I'm outraged. I'm righteously indignant towards this because it's the fuel that makes me understand they're not going to piss on my head telling me it's rain because they thought I was some kind of new fool. I'm not expendable, and neither are you. That's the point of everything that I've been through this entire time. Because when you get to these truisms that my colleague, my compatriot, my comrade, my friend, Regan Boychuk, and again, as you know, and I demonstrate this all the time, I'm not a socialist. I do believe that there's room for socialism and a giant hybrid, and I always encourage people, you want to be a socialist, you can go create a microbrew. You can create a co-op. But the country is so huge and dynamic, and so is the world economy, that there's rooms for the safety net, while at the same time accommodating innovation and incentive and those sorts of things, if and only if there is risk reward, which is the notion of capitalism versus gangsterism and stage capitalism. But what I have revealed is socialism for criminal billionaires. And that's the sum total of my journey that intersects with what Reagan just laid out, particularly as it relates to commodities, because everything is based on the assets and the way you laid out so constructed so brilliantly. And I'm going to ask you to finish off once I get through this aspect of double entry bookkeeping, because that's one thing you didn't actually address. But as it related to Michael Hudson and the balance of payments, yes, he is a Marxist socialist economist who speaks truth. The guy was with Herman Kahn, I think it was. He was placed inside Citigroup. I think it was Citi initially, right? Where it was his, or it was JP Morgan Chase. It was JP Morgan Chase that actually extrapolated the balance of payment. They learned from the realities of his studies of how to actually game the system further by this balance of payments structure predicated on the oil paradigm. Okay, first and foremost. And what he revealed was that the exorbitant privilege of the dollar's reserve currency predicated this, enabled all of this financialization, of which ultimately engulfed and incorporated the global billionaire oligarchic class. And it's step and repeat. It's always been there in the shadows since 9/11. There's no question. Way before that, 71 being, I think, the initial domino. But on overdrive for both of us since 9/11. But it's been mostly in the shadows. And I kept thinking to myself, my God, does anybody not see what's happening here? In 2019, we had the largest mega merger IPO in the history of Wall Street, which is, of course, Saudi Aramco. Now, it was kind of already the American Saudi thing, but it was when finance fully extrapolated and made Saudi Aramco by far the most valuable company in the world, far beyond Apple at this stage, right? Which made the Saudi family even that much more exorbitantly wealthy than they were even before then, which was incredible considering the disparity of wealth in the kingdom compared to what we're now creating here, which is a theocratic, oligarchic, fascist hybrid that is the same the new boss, same as the old boss. If you lived in Mussolini's Italy or Hitler's Germany, or 1,000 years of corruption without in the Holy Roman Empire sort of thing, and that's what it's always been. The battle between good and evil is really on a paradigmatic level of power. It's like absolute power corrupts absolutely, and we've known that for centuries, as have we known, and I always comment, or I should quote, Bastiat from 17th century libertarian, or his libertarian philosophy within the midst of France's upheaval, was when the group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. Hence, imperialism. Same boss, old boss, new boss, same as the old boss. Okay. In the shadows and all of the other stuff is a myth, unless, of course, we the people do exactly what our founding fathers did, even though, please understand, I understand all the flaws. I understand but they were the only educated class at the time to actually put this structure together with the hope supposedly for some. And of course, it was a mixed bag, but in order to form a perfect union. And here we are about the 250th anniversary at a time of literal Armageddon / rapture, which is ironic, all things considered. I'll save that for a moment. But I want to share my screen because I think a couple of things that Reagan had identified, I think is extremely important for me to just kind of address. So the first thing, I brought up this image of Don the Con, transactional Rico pedo pig, right? Nobody can be under the assumption that Donald Trump is the mastermind of anything. The guy is a complete idiot. Like I said, he, among other faux pas, said, in addition to flip-flopping on things that are so insane for an American president to say, that, the entirety of this adventurism again in Iran is about uh, what do we say at the end? Well, really, the way we approached World War II in Japan and unconditional surrender. Okay, he says that at the outset. Now he's flip flopping. They didn't even have a plan to kind of deal with the Strait of Hormuz, or and what that's doing to roiling global markets. And now he's like, yeah, I'm trying to get a quick passage. Look, the Iranians know that America doesn't have an attention span, and they only really care about what hits them at home. And ultimately, Don the Con Rico Pedo Pig, who's never been committed to anything other than his own bottom line and his own, power grab, that when things start to shift, this guy will just, who knows what he's going to do. Now, there's other players in the mix, of course, Netanyahu, and there's a lot of discussion of whether or not Netanyahu has been assassinated, which I find very interesting at the moment. But nuclear war, whatever could potentially tripwire this into a global, outwardly projecting world war, which I think we've been in the midst of for 2 decades anyway. But I think this picture really encapsulated because he's Joe Cardani, and anybody not thinking of him as such, as literally the character straight out of Gotham, you're insane. And so, would you be rooting for the villains in Gotham? I think most Americans, if they just could sit down and understand what revealing how this whole thing works, they'd be like, no, we've got to have a unified force of millions of Americans standing for the virtue of what the American Revolution is all about. But in 2026, given the insanity of what we're in the midst of, i.e., what Reagan has germinated, this is the greatest opportunity in the history of our lives. We, meaning Reagan and I, have been in the depths of this depravity for over 25 years. And we now see that everything, the emperor's new clothes, right? Everybody can see what is going on, and nobody can exist in silos. Nobody is safe. We're building warehouses illegally by ICE budgets without states' approval to do what exactly? If there's a short end in Iran, or even if it's an elongated real war with troops on the ground and that sort of thing, all of these things lend themselves to martial law or some sort of disruption in the election system to be able to keep this oligarchic class in power. It's not about Donald Trump as much as it is Donald Trump. He's not the mastermind. He's wagged the dog. He always has been. And it reminds me of when Reagan was, providing us, can you see the light? One of my favorite films from the 80s, John Carpenter, and it's kind of a noir comedy, if you will, with some of the best lines in American cinema history, especially from that wonderful era in the 80s. I can walk and chew gum. I can chew gum and kick ass at the same time, or whatever that famous line was. But this was, if you look at some of these images, it's just hilarious. I mean, a bay, everybody is in the fog of this insanity of propaganda, and it's all about the man behind the mask. And everybody's going to be destroyed or being really pigs led to slaughter, and until you take off the shades, or put on the shades in this case, so where you could actually see the light. And that's ultimately what we're doing here. I mean, I know many of you know this, but I mean, it's like allegiance to what? I mean, these images are just so fantastic, and it's just so funny to be able to pull that out. But guys, I've been on a long journey, and my first film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, you can see just from our banner, America for Sale. This is the film I quoted at the very beginning that I'll do a link down at the bottom. That can anybody at this moment, Reagan, say that America is not completely for sale in the Trump administration? I mean, it's insane how transparent the billionaire backdoor through crypto and this, that, and the other to the family and what they're setting up and what the Supreme Court does. I made this 13 years ago when I put together the paradigm of power that Reagan and I are talking about, because it's been our whole lives. But yeah, when you put on the shades of They Live, you see through all of the bullshit. That's the lens that Reagan was referring to, and it gives you the truth. And what I always love to say is that when you have the truth, you're bulletproof. But my colleague Roseanne Rabiot-Lamile says, and she's a bit older, even though she's got the energy of someone in their 20s. I think she's 76 years old. She says, when you have the truth, you're drinking from the fountain of youth. This has got to spread like wildfire for people that want to turn the tables on this monstrosity, which literally is the end, both literally and figuratively, both fictionally and biblically and realistically. All of these things are converging with all of these things we've known about humanity forever. And like I said, my whole sort of juxtaposition beginning with the first domino of Forward 13, waking up the American dream, is I'm not expendable. Chances are you're not either. And if you feel that way about yourself, you have to empower yourself with the truth of how the system works. And for those of you out there who think to yourself, well, this sounds cultish, or this sounds almost, step and repeat of, Trump, but just with another lens. No, guys, the truth is not subjective. Now, there's religious and theoretical and fictional and depictions and this and that or the other of what the so-called truth is. We have a legal system that predicates judgment and convictions and the rule of law predicated on the truth of the evidence. It's what murder convictions are all about. Same with any sort of crime. Did you run a stop sign? Was that subjective? Did you get caught speeding? Were you drinking and driving? Any manner, shape, or form, there is a truth to a story. Now, are there different degrees? Are there different nuances? Yeah, of course. But there's also racketeering. And to what my great friend said, it's not rocket science. This is the shortcut. It's racketeering. It's people aligned to do crime. And they can get away with it when they subjugate the law, which is what this hostile takeover of this billionaire oligarchic class has been able to do. And at the same time, without you being aware of it, do the smash and grab technique of basically destroying the world economy and then ultimately saving themselves to where they can double down, triple down, quadruple down, to where they, because of legal structures and LLCs and other ways that people can hide debt and then shift it, to somebody else, i.e. the entire paradigm of Trump. And then his calculus is lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate, never admit to anything under the Roy Cohn sort of debacle of all things, what that mafiocracy is all about. And so what we're presenting to you are the brass tacks, the structure that shows you this whole thing is built on a house of cards and can collapse at any moment. And right now we're in the midst of private credit calamity that looks to be one of the major crises about to unfold, not to mention all of the things that have been built into the bubble of AI, not to mention the environmental strata of what's happening with the global war on oil that just basically furthers the revelation of everything that we're talking about. You can't escape the reality that 2026 is literally 1976, ironically, because that's when we celebrated our 200th anniversary. But we had an oil shortage that increased costs and almost wrecked the economy, that led to that time period's response from Chairman Volcker, and I could go into that whole thing. But my next foray after this was prologue, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream. But the work that Regan had, inured to was really the investigation that led me to Bill Black. And that's this, the con. The American dream dies where power lies, imperialism. And ultimately, I said, we were all sold a lie. Interestingly enough, I've got a theory that Steve Bannon watched this when it first came out and basically juxtaposed the 2006, or sorry, the 2020 J6, everything based on this. I think he took it and manipulated it and created the psychological construct that we were all sold a lie, but for them, with obviously all things rigging the election, which is insanity, and then it's led to everything else that we're in the mix of, right? So we put together a 5-part series that did what the entire federal government couldn't do because of revolving door corruption. And the Obama administration let that happen, okay? Obama played a role in that. And because they let Wall Street get away with tens of trillions of dollars illegally for destroying the world, predicated on all of the elements that Reagan laid out, and then some, quite frankly. But what would you expect to happen? If you give a crack addict a safe filled with crack, an endless stream of crack, and then you give him the combination to unlock that safe, what do you think is going to happen? What we're in the midst of, which is literally melting down before our eyes. And I am a producer and I love movies and I love fictional depictions. We've seen this movie 1,000 times if you've been around, and we continue to see it, but it's real. And ultimately, that leads us to the Clean New Deal. And I'll just finish with this. Look, guys, please check out Patrick Lovell presents thecleannewdeal.com or thecleannewdeal.org, and you can see the structure. You've got to do what I've done, which you've got to reset your mind, because I still think that my theory is, and it's really hard to do the analytics on this, but I think most people now are overwhelmed and they're so exhausted from so much disinformation, nor do they really have a footing, because they don't understand geopolitics, they don't understand the law, they don't understand the history, they don't understand the structure of our government, and so they're lost in translation, and they want to hide in the four corners of their universe. But when you stick your head in the sand and you leave your backside vulnerable to a bunch of serial rapists, what do you think is going to happen? The same thing that happened to young, aspiring, people in the music industry that thought by getting access to power that they might be, seen in a way where they could become something, i.e., in the P. Diddy universe. But instead, they were roofied and raped in the shadows to where they were controlled. This is what this system is doing to everyone. And it doesn't matter if you want to use the analogy of Weinstein and Me Too, and then Black Lives Matter and all things qualified immunity, and then, of course, all things Epstein, which is the billionaire Epstein class. They can be above the law with impunity, getting free money to train wreck all of the systems that are an illusion. And they know you're not going to do anything about it because you don't know how that works, because they destroyed media. You don't have a bearing. You don't know the ABCs. And so you don't have the ability to protect yourself unless you wrap your head around the truth, which means you have to recalibrate your mind to understand. We don't live in a democracy. We don't function in a capitalistic system. We don't have free markets. The law is unequal. We do not have separation of powers. Corruption rules everything. Challenge me on any of this. I would love to hear from anybody who is a PhD in economics, somebody at the highest levels of the law, somebody who clerks at the Supreme Court, somebody who fancies themselves a journalist who knows a lot at the New York Times, Rolling Stone, doesn't matter, even though I interact with a lot of you. And challenge me on any of these paradigmatic questions. Most of you just want to react to the 24-hour cycle. And that's the brilliance of this diabolical strategy of Steve Bannon and his billionaire autocrats to flood the zone. You don't know what direction the current's coming. You can't get a footing. You don't know what's going on. That's them pissing on your head, telling you it's rain, until you have fully grasped the paradigm of diabolical deception and betrayal that has destroyed everything the United States and the global community post-World War II was supposed to be after 70 million plus people died in that last global, horror scenario. And that's on the way. And I think we've seen post-COVID and everything else that it seems to me that the billionaires are showing their cards. They've got, of course, their compounds on private islands. They can go to space. Again, it's some sort of science fiction Orwellian horror film that we're all in the midst of, that we've seen a million times. So what are you going to do about it? Well, I hope that after this conversation, you understand that you've got to empower yourself with the information that's here. And I encourage you to read through everything, check every source that's cited, check out the movie that I'll put down in the link below and my trailers. And if you have any questions, I recommend reaching out to me. But I can tell you right now, after this conversation that I've had with Regan, that's now probably pushing 2 hours, we're in a position, Reagan, we're in a glorious position. If we can convince millions of Americans and then globally, because I hear this from my friends in Canada, I hear this from people in all English speaking countries. They're like, my God, the Clean New Deal should happen in our country. Yeah, but it has to start with the United States. It has to start with the United States because we are probably, and I hope it doesn't sound arrogant saying this and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you agree with this. We're the only ones, even though we're hanging on by a thread, that have just enough left that if we could get the masses galvanized and mobilized behind a revolution of truth and a civil rights like matter before things go off the deep end and then there's no other choice because we're deep into, basically it appears to be the plan has always been Russia 1998 forward under Putin's, basically gulags and controlling, their elections in fraudulent ways and everything else. I think that's where we are. Okay. If we don't hold this administration accountable, if we don't turn the tables, if we don't follow the precepts of the Clean New Deal, we're going to lose our country for our lifetimes until somebody smarter, wiser, stronger, more committed probably finds us in some sort of capsule and says those dudes had the answers all along and maybe reconfigures and do what we're calling for 100 years from now. Let's hope that's not the case underneath the skeletons of millions of people. We can turn this around now. We can save the country. We can save the world. There's smart ways to do this. There's enough space and cooperation and common sense with good meaning people around the world to work collaboratively and in cooperation to where a rising tide raises all ships, that freedom and liberty and justice actually mean something. But more importantly, accountability to absolute power unplugs their monstrous deception and betrayal and then reboots what I call loosely the American dream. Because the American dream is exactly that. It's freedom and liberty and justice for all. And are we going to be a empty vessel? That's what we are. And I'm disgusted by it. And I hope that together, Reagan and I have inspired you to consider adopting or at least investigating and then hopefully coming on board. Because if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in liberty, integrity, decency, dignity, survivability, sustainability, beauty, opportunity, equality, all of those things that make life worth living and possible, when we merge in unity behind the Clean New Deal, we will turn the tables and purge the misery of tyranny, like the founding fathers, to unleash the renaissance of possibility if and only if you become a nuclear reaction vector to the Big Bang of truth that this is providing so that we force light into the depravity of darkness. Do you have anything final to add?
I think that Alberta offers both the most incredible test of your theory, which is the ability to predict. And I think your clear understanding makes a very clear prediction about what's happening right now. One of these crazy, stupid ideas by Donald Trump that everybody laughs off. Canada as the 51st state. Oh, did you see? He said that thing. That's so silly. Such a silly idea. Unless you know the history, that it's not a joke, it's not a threat, it's a reminder that we own you, that you're part of it. And there's something happening in Alberta today, right now, a color revolution of the sort the CIA concocts all over the world these days. It's a lot like what happened in Alberta over the last 150 years. It not only proves this theory, it predicts something like what's happening in Alberta today. There's a referendum on the province of Alberta with all that oil separating from the rest of Canada to become an independent state. And that independence movement happens to be led by a very curious cast of characters. And they happen to be intimately lifelong connected with another batch of really curious characters. that were installed by Standard Oil and the Rockefellers in 1935. Before the CIA, before any of that sort of thing, the United States and Britain installed a government, created a political party in Alberta with a bunch of false promises that they were going to create a provincial bank and print new money and just give it away to every citizen in the middle of the Great Depression. And they got themselves elected. Put them Americans in charge of all that oil. And they appointed an American to be in charge of the regulator. And they created a bank to facilitate this crime. And they gave it all away. And this premier ran Alberta like a colony, locked up political prisoners, worked them in hard labor till they died, locked up children in cages. It was a really shitty place, kind of like a colony, while they stole everything. Then in 1971, the Canadian equivalent of Bill Black broke the system and Canada became independent. And until a string of assassinations in the 1980s, the 15 years of Alberta that I was born into and grew up in was a sovereign place with a whole lot of resources that we acted like owners. We enforced the law and built a really nice place that has been going downhill in the 30 years since, as Americans have recaptured control of Alberta and all of its oil. And that culminated in 2003 when they financialized all of the oil. That 26-year-old Bible student that Standard Oil installed in Alberta in 1935, he gave away 175 billion barrels of oil to the Rockefellers at a meeting at his house in the 1950s. It took a little while till 2003 till they were able to cash in and make the trillions of dollars in loot that they turned on Americans and parlayed again. And we're coming up to something similar. Now that all the masks are down, the imperialism is naked, you don't even need to make excuses. Jokes about being the 51st state are not jokes. And when there's a giant, weird, strange, internet-based separatist movement in Alberta, which happens to have the vast majority of the world's privately controlled oil reserves, it's not innocent. And so the premier that laid the stage for this, Jason Kenney, he's a lifelong creation of Preston Manning, the second son of Ernest Manning, the premier installed in 1935 by the Rockefellers. His firstborn son was disabled and held in a New York school until the first oil sands mine was approved in Canada. The Americans held the firstborn premier's son hostage until he approved the first oil sands mine. His second son has become the godfather of the political right wing in Canada. He founded a new political party in the 80s, brought together old parties in the 90s. To this day, Preston Manning's is the good-natured uncle of the political right wing. And he has a giant political machine that creates these political quislings that serve American empire. The last premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, born and raised his whole career working for the Ernest Manning political machine. He handed the keys to the current premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith. Entire career, everything she's ever done, part of the Manning political machine. The leader of the media, this new right-wing, internet, racist, right-wing, edgy media, Ezra Levant, another lifelong Manning family creation, worked for Prime Minister Stephen Harper, worked for Jason Kenney, and the leader of the separatist movement is a guy named David Parker. He used to work for Stephen Harper. He used to work for Jason Kenney. He used to work for the current premier who he's supposed to oppose. They're all Manning family creations. And those are the leaders of today's separatist movement in Alberta. And in October, they're holding a referendum on officially moving towards separating Alberta from the rest of Canada, creating a sovereign state. And you know what? Canada's the only place in the world where something like that could work. Because in 1971, when the US lost control of Alberta and we went on this independence streak, there became a very militant independence movement in Quebec, the French. who had been defeated by the British and had the remnants, and there's a distinct culture, and there's a huge independence sovereignty movement within Quebec. And it wasn't quite successful, but it was big and it grew, and we sorted it out in good Canadian style. That we had a test case in the Supreme Court. And so, unique in the world, Canada's Supreme Court has laid out a path for a province to separate from the country. And Quebec never did it, but Alberta is about to do it. Because that has been set up and is waiting there, because of the yellow media and the Manning family political machine that has been running Alberta for 1 century, they're going to win. Alberta's going to be independent. It doesn't have anything to do with the truth or reality or Albertans. This is an imperial ploy, same as it ever was before World War I, World War II. I've been writing and arguing that we've been approaching World War III for a number of years now, since the Nord Stream accident, terrorism. That was the the starting track towards it. No one's going to admit it and say it, but it's pretty clear we're there now. Alberta's at the center of it. You couldn't possibly make sense of it if you didn't understand Wall Street or the history. But that's the power of this understanding and this framework, that we can make a sense of what's happening now, and we could stop it. Not only can 100 years after we're able to finally figure out the truth of what happened, we know what they're doing right now. We know what they want to do tomorrow. We can watch them put the pieces in place. We can watch them lie. We can watch those characters. They're not stupid. They're not. That's the power of this perspective, is we can see that happening, and America can stop it, prevent it. The American elite need Alberta to survive. That is one of the pillars of Wall Street. That's what pins up this game. Saudi Arabia, Alberta, those are in the deep back pocket. You don't even know how you got Saudi Arabia's oil. You didn't buy it. Nothing happened. It's a little bit weird. It just happened. And you have absolute complete, it's a little bit weird, but you have control of Saudi Arabia. You have control of Alberta. We know what to do, what's coming. And now, thanks to Patch, we have the Clean New Deal. We know what to do about it. That's how you stop this and everything like it. That's what's going on. That's how they work. It's not stupid, but good for me that everybody needs the link between America and Alberta to be broken. You have enough to ruin everything. That link needs to be broken. Alberta does need to be sovereign. And that's the funny thing about all these separatists. They don't care that it's Americans robbing us. They don't want to hear it. They won't acknowledge it or talk about it. And they don't have any plan for escaping the Ogdensburg Treaty. America owns us. You're not going to just go become independent. And so that's what's coming. That's what they're building towards. Iran isn't for control. It isn't to put into American gas pumps. That's everybody else's oil. So they're just effing it up. They got Alberta, and they are tightening their grip and tightening their grip and tightening their grip. And no matter what, you can't find a journalist to call any of it out, to call a spade, to put the pieces together. You can't find a historian to talk about these things. There's some pretty persuasive parallels here that should be explored, even if I'm completely wrong, even if I'm lying about everything. There's so much here, so important, that at least has to be investigated. And you don't even have to be smart. You can be a roofer. The truth is not complicated. The evidence is not subjective. And we don't have to believe their fairy tales, because that's the premise of it. If we can see clearly, think for ourselves, we still have a fighting chance. No excuses and no time. But every Friday you can turn into the people that made this analysis possible, that make the reform plausible. That's an enormous gift, lifetimes, decades of necessary work for us to even have the hope of making sense of this crazy moment. But we got it. And it's been documented. It's on film. It's gone through everything. It has There's no rough edges. There's no loose ends. It couldn't have worked if there were any holes in the story. But because it's right, it reveals the future. Points, explains what we need to do.
They just quashed us, man. And we had powerful players in the background, but they were more powerful, and so that's why we have to penetrate your bubble, my friends out there. Please like, subscribe, and share. And final comment, for those of you who are probably thinking this, I'm sure I'm not the only one, as Reagan was giving us that last piece. Look, Reagan in the United States is really not that different. I mean, from the standpoint of, we had a Confederacy. After the Confederacy, we had Jim Crow. After Jim Crow, there was an evolution of billionaire white supremacists that merged with what we're now calling Christo-fascists. It's just white supremacy, basically, right? And they had the John Birch Society. They had America First. They were deeply ensconced in all things. Well, I mentioned Roy Cohn, but at that time, McCarthy, Senator McCarthy, and also, of course, all things J. Edgar Hoover, FBI, if you want to know the truth. And this is the empire. And when I was hearing what you were talking about in terms of this, at least on an immediate sort of response for people who are like thinking of the things we've seen in Canada, it's like the separatist movement. It's like anti-Americanism. No, what you just described was they're aligned with the white supremacist John Birch / oil Rockefeller empire, which turns that whole thing on its head. But it's like, that's what smash and grab imperialism has done throughout history, quite frankly. And by the way, we see it all the time, depicted fictionally in what is the most recent Star Wars that we're all responding to, about a year ago. Do you know which one I'm talking about? It's like this new series from Star Wars that's basically about the revolution within. Anyway, it was like more of a nuanced, it wasn't as cartoonish and childish. It was definitely more involved with strategic thinking in terms of resources and capitulation and ownership and how you run an empire, quite frankly. And so why can't I think of the name? It'll come to me as soon as I hit stop. Look, we've been going for quite a while, but perfect for a Sunday. Reagan, let's keep this going, man. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for your passion. More importantly, thank you for your unbelievable skill and effort to discern at a very high level elements that I feel like I learn every single time. So that is just a huge, huge benefit to everything that we're trying to do. And eventually, my friends out there, we are trying to build, and this is part and parcel to an effort my partner and I have been in a long time. And hopefully the likes of Reagan can be a part of, and so on and so forth. We're simply muckraker media. We are the modern day Upton Sinclairs going against the Borg of this insanity. But if you understand the empire, you understand that Larry Ellison and technology and Peter Thiel and all of those things that are happening with its emergence and its massive merger and acquisition with all things media to basically, rug pull 60 Minutes, even though 60 Minutes had been rug pulled since the 90s with, the story of tobacco, big tobacco, because of the concern. This isn't new. This has been going on for a very long time, centuries, but the modern version is literally since the 80s in our country, in the United States, which is global. And all of this is just unpacking it so that they can't, again, throw you in the garbage and destroy you and everything that matters to you, and make it act as if everything that this country's fought for over the course of the last 250 years is whitewashed. The Supreme Court of the United States just basically etch-a-sketched the 14th Amendment, Section 3, to allow Trump to run for office, even though he was involved, if not wag the dog, in some capacity of, engineering January 6th as an insurrectionist. People, it's not that complicated. You just have to wake up. So thank you to all who have turned in, and all the best to you. And I look forward to talking to you next week. All the best, Reagan. Onwards and upwards, everyone. Take care.